Woo, we got a good morning back. Thank you. Well, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Christine Harrington, and I am honored to be serving as the Executive Director of the Center for Student Success, which is housed at the New Jersey Council of County Colleges. And I have had the distinct pleasure of working with so many of you over the course of the last year or so, and really trying to move the needle on what we're calling guided pathways, this national movement to improve student success experiences and, most importantly, outcomes. So you are all playing a critical role in this work, and I just want to applaud you and all of the incredible work that you're doing at your institutions, and for you to take the time to come together for this state level event that we're having today and that we have frequently, as you know, throughout the year. So for those of you who are not as familiar with guided pathways, I do want to just give you a very brief overview of what it is, because it really does guide all of the work of the center. So if you think about the word pathways, we're really helping students kind of be able to figure out what is a very clear path from point A to point B. So many of you have been working on your program maps, trying to more clearly articulate to students the roadmap that they need in order to get to success. We've also spent an enormous amount of time and energy really thinking about what happens along that pathway in terms of learning and teaching. So you'll see that the kinds of events that are sponsored by the center are really focused completely on this guided pathways framework. So we're trying to, A, help colleges establish really clear pathways, B, help faculty really do the best that they can do in their classes to help students learn. So we're going to really emphasize the teaching and learning and professional development for faculty. And then if we look at the word guided, well, what does that mean? That means we need to help students pick a pathway, choose a pathway to get on, and stay on that path. So what we're doing today is a really critical element of that guided component, because advising and student support redesign is really at the heart, I think, of the guided component of guided pathways. So for those of you who are not aware, the center is one of 14 centers across the nation. So New Jersey is very, very special in that we're one of the first, so we were kind of in that first round of centers to be established. And the first executive director is here with us, Dr. Mattis. So Jacinia really did an amazing job. Everybody give her a round of applause. I say all the time, I don't know how she developed such a great foundation for me to work from, but she did. I mean, really, it didn't exist, and she just developed this great center for us. And stepping into it and getting to move it to the next level has been just such an honor. So we have, these 14 states that are a part of this national network, which is a very cool thing. And we're very fortunate to have our several of national partners here with us. And most importantly, we have Jobs for the Future. So Andrea Hunkos is here. Everybody give a shout out to Andrea, please. Excellent. We have a couple of other new partners from Research for Action. So we have Mark, and I'm so sorry, I forgot your name again. Jason. Mark and Jason from Research for Action. So if you could please kind of just give them a welcome as well. And I'm going to get to the next national partner, Achieving the Dream, in a moment. So you folks are going to get quite the shout out because they're the stars of the day. So I call them the advising queens, so that's their new title. We're going to get them t-shirts and all, but Andrea will be introducing them in just a moment. But I think what's really important for you to understand is that because we're a part of this national network, Jobs for the Future was very fortunate enough to be able to secure this great grant from the Gates Foundation that is providing resources to states with centers. So because we were a center, we were able to be in the running for some of the resources that they had. And they had lots of different types of resources for centers at different places. And, I raised my hand as high as I could. I know I'm short, but I kind of jumped up and down as much as I could to say it really seems like the area that the colleges in New Jersey needs the most help and are ready to roll with is the advising redesign. So we were really lucky to be selected to be able to get that kind of support. And today is the kickoff event for that. Now, it is not just an event. Today is going to be a real meaningful day. And as you know, you did some pre-work. We gave you some assignments to read, treating you like students, had you do some homework and getting ready for everything for today. But today is really the kickoff. So you'll see in your packet, if you picked it up at the front, that there's a year-long programming, year-long different levels of different kinds of programs, some in person, some online. So the ATD team is going to be back again in March, and we are going to have a series of webinars and other supports throughout the year to really help you engage in this process, not just talk about this process, but to really make the magic happen so that you're changing things at your institution for the better of students. Because at the end of the day, that's who we're all here for, really, right? We want to make this journey and the road that they travel and where they're heading to a really successful opportunity. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Andrea Hunkels. Oh, wait, I forgot to mention a couple of really important people that are here. So first of all, we have Jake Farman from the council. Everybody go ahead and give Jake a shout out. And Donna, you got to stand up. Donna Rogalski, oh my God, right? I mean, I don't know if you folks know, but this stuff couldn't happen without Donna Rogalski. She is amazing. She does everything, every detail, every high level thing. She's a true partner because we really are the center. This is it. We have support from the council, but we're the center. So we're really, super, super appreciative of everything that Donna does every day for all of you. All right, now it's time to introduce Andrea Hunkels. So I'm going to have her say a few words about JFF, and then she'll introduce our advising queens.
Thanks, Christine. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Hunkels. I recognize some of you because I've been here to other events over the last year. I'm an associate director at Jobs for the Future, and we are a national nonprofit working to build educational and economic opportunity, especially for underserved populations across the U.S. And I'm part of the post-secondary team at JFF, and I'm here today in a couple of different roles. We're structured on my team to work with these 14 states, this national network that Christine was talking about. I'm part of the two-person team that is the New Jersey team with my colleague Chris Baldwin. So I'm here today in that capacity. I also work in partnership with Achieving the Dream and building out services and supports across the network. And as Christine mentioned, we've been hearing a lot from the states that we work with about the need to work on advising and student supports redesign. So over the last 6 months to a year, we've been partnering with a number of organizations, but particularly with Achieving the Dream on this work to bring supports and services to the national network that we support. And New Jersey is the first state that's going to be kicking off an in-state institute today. So we're really eager to learn from the work that you're doing and to share what we're doing here across this national network, because it's really a peer network, state to state learning. So I just want to thank you. I'll be here listening and observing and talking with you, along with Mark and Jason from Research for Action. They are one of our partners helping us develop what is the theory of change around the student success centers. So we're really excited to be here, and that this, as Christine mentioned, all of this work is through generous support from the Gates Foundation and the Kresge Foundation and other local support. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Mayen Ireland from Achieving the Dream, who will talk more about today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Mayen Ireland. I'm the Director of Integrated Student Support Strategies at Achieving the Dream. And we're really excited to spend the day with you. So we have planned for you a jam-packed Friday from 10 to 3. We promise to get you out at 3 o'clock, though. I have with me our Associate Director in this area, Julia Lawton, and the Assistant Director for Data Technology and Analytics at Achieving the Dream, Camille Powell. So we're excited to spend the day with you. It will be very hands-on. I know you had that homework assignment. It's going to be a lot of kind of team opportunities, because what we're doing today is really, as Christine mentioned, we're going to give you a little bit of the kind of theory, what's happening nationally on this topic. But this is really about implementation. We really want you all to get into the how on your campus and really walk away feeling like you have the tools and next steps that you need to either kind of launch your work around advising redesign or to accelerate it. Because I know many of you are already doing pieces of this, and this hopefully is a way for you to really see a way forward that will accelerate the work that you've started and how you're aligning it with your guided pathways work. So a couple just kind of notes about the materials that you've received so far. So when you checked in, hopefully you picked up an agenda. And the plan for today is, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time right away. There will be a little bit of me talking at you, just a warning, just about 20 minutes, because I think it is helpful that we get all on the same page about what we mean by an integrated student support approach. What are the components of that? What are other institutions across the country doing? What does the research say? So I'll do a little bit of talking at you, but then we're going to dive more into really what are the critical steps that institutions need to take to do this type of work on their campus. And we've broken that into several categories that align with the toolkit, which is the other thing that you picked up. So you picked up a hard copy of a spiral-bound toolkit that we've created to really help institutions walk through the design and implementation process for this work. So the rest of the day will really be kind of walking you through several of those chapters. We're not going to be, reading the chapters, but doing activities that align with those chapters so that you feel like you're very familiar with the toolkit, can take that back to your campus and really kind of dig into that type of work. So we'll go through some of the kind of discovery and planning process, a little bit reflecting on your own institutional readiness. And then trying to hit some of the key components that we know are so critical for institutions doing this work, particularly around communication, because as I'll talk later, we're really talking about changing people and processes, and that can be hard work in terms of thinking about buy-in and things like that. So communication, starting to do your action planning. We won't be doing it as deeply as what's in the toolkit, but again, we want to make sure that you have a sense of everything in the toolkit so that you can really use it when you get back to campus. And then spending a little time on the progress tracking, which is chapter 8 in the toolkit, but is actually really important to be thinking about how you're going to evaluate and track your progress at the stage of design. So that's why we've put that in for today as well. But as Christine mentioned, I just wanted to emphasize this really is part 1. So we hope that you all will come back again in the spring, that you see all of this as a cohesive year of support. This isn't just a one-time event, because we really, in the spring, we're going to give you a little bit of homework after today of things to be working on between now and the next institute in the spring, so that we can kind of continue to push forward through that institute as well. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I forgot. I did want to start by just saying, and it may be preaching to the choir, you may already know Achieving the Dream, but just for anyone who's not familiar, Achieving the Dream, we're a national reform network of over 230 institutions from across the country focused on strengthening community colleges' capacities to ensure that students complete and kind of reach the economic success, particularly for underrepresented student populations. So we do that in a couple different ways. One is through our coaching work. So we have kind of a coaching model that institutions in our network go through, where there's a data and a leadership coach. We also do this through our incubation work, and that is where we kind of get large-scale grants to then incubate some new idea, some new kind of promising practice with the colleges. So one example of that has actually been what has produced a lot of the work that you'll see today, was our IPASS grant initiative, Integrated Planning and Advising for Student Success. This was a 3-year grant from the Gates Foundation focused on helping institutions figure out how to leverage technology and do this kind of redesign in order to create more proactive and holistic advising and student support interactions with students. So a lot of the work today really builds on kind of the incubation that we've done over the past 2.5 years with those 26 institutions, and what we've learned about kind of success. What are some of those critical components of success moving forward? I'm going to jump in now to the talking at you. So One thing I'll say is these slides will be available because, hopefully you feel like this is a useful kind of foundational context to get and something you might want to use back on your campus. If there's people that aren't here that need to hear this, we'll have these slides available to you. The other thing I'll say is, feel free to, in your toolkit, on your cool little post-it. I don't know about you, but I love that little post-it book. Anybody else love the post-it book? Yes. Jot some notes as we go. I'm going to kind of go through it, but there'll be time for questions at the end. So, jot down questions you have, things that you think, I like this, but, or kind of lingering questions that it kind of raises in your mind. So first, is kind of setting the context. Well, what is the challenge that we're trying to tackle here? For us, and a lot of this comes from the research, we know that in general, there's this sense that services and supports are fragmented on campus. Some people call it silos. Some of the Noel Levitt's data talks about students feeling like they get the runaround. They have to go here for an answer here. They have to retell their story over here. So that's one piece of it. The other thing is we know that it's usually more efficient to just provide students with information rather than do the kind of developmental work, trying to create the more problem-solving skills. And that's because, when we think about advisors, they usually have huge caseloads. So when you think about how to gain efficiencies, it's sometimes there's not enough time for advisors to have those deeper, more meaningful conversations. And so we end up doing a lot of kind of transactional relationships with giving them the information. The other thing that is kind of a trend is this idea of an inoculation approach, that we just kind of hit them with all the supports they need, or give them the information, give them a list of services at orientation that they'll need, and we kind of front load that type of support. And then, really don't kind of have a sustained way of carrying out how we connect them with services throughout their whole experience. We also know, we've got the kind of issues, I don't know if you all are feeling them, I assume, as many of our network colleges, with kind of decreasing enrollments, there's kind of budget cut type of implications that are, making staff and faculty feel overburdened. And that also sometimes produce technology challenges. Either we don't have the right technologies or haven't been able to invest in creating really integrated technologies. And then the last is that, anyone familiar with the term initiative fatigue? Some people try to, be very more positive and call it initiative rich, that maybe you're initiative rich at your institution. But we know that piece around all these different initiatives means that we're competing for people's time, means that there is kind of that there can be a wearing effect of that. And so these are kind of the conditions that we kind of recognize that we're trying to overcome, trying to find some strategies around in this work. We also know from the research on kind of what's good, like what are really these are kind of 4 key components of student support from the Community College Research Center. I love a lot of the research that they do out of there. And so for them, the first in terms of kind of strong student supports is around creating social relationships. And that's, we hear a lot about the sense of belonging. We know that, again, that's hard if you only have enough time to give them information. How do we really build that type of relationship, promote that kind of social relationship? Clarifying aspirations and creating commitment. This is where I think Guided Pathways really tries to really address this factor. We know how important it is for them to be able for students to start with their end goals in mind, have a clear picture of how to get there, how to create that kind of commitment, know where they're heading with their work. Developing college know-how, that kind of back to that metacognitive skills, time for that. And then making college life feasible. And for me, that's also about the wraparound services, the non-academic services, as well as the academic services, knowing that those are so important because they come to campus. We think of the bubble of campus, but we know that they bring with them a lot of what's going on in their lives at home. So when we talk about an integrated student support approach, one thing that I think is both good, but sometimes can be frustrating for people, is it's not a model. Like, we call it an approach because we're not going to be there telling you, okay, you need to centralize advising or decentralize. You need to, it needs to look like this with your handoffs. You have to have these services structured in this way. It's really not about one model, one structural model. What it is about is kind of that there's some underlying principles that are really critical as you think about what your model in your context looks like. So this is the SIP model. So that's one way that we like to talk about, okay, what's good look like when you're thinking about what an integrated student support approach would be. So sustained, that's that piece around how do we sustain our supports and the way that we connect students to services across their whole student experience. Strategic, and this is because we know that there's not enough resources to do high-touch services to all students, and not all students need high-touch services. So how can we really be strategic about how we differentiate service and connect students to them that need them? Integrated is one of the most important, obviously, because it's in the title of how we talk about the approach. But Karen Stout, our president and CEO, she likes to talk about this as the great integrator, that this type of work can become the great integrator on campus, and that was from some work that she did at Montgomery County Community College when she was president. That we're really talking about bringing together disparate technologies, disconnected services, siloed departments into a more cohesive whole. Proactive, and that's the piece around, really how do we connect students to the services that they need when they need them, that just-in-time piece, or even before they need them. How can we really be more proactive in the way we connect students with the support they need? And then finally, personalized, and this goes back a little bit to that importance of social relationships. How do we really kind of personalize the supports to students, knowing that the research says that students are most likely to follow through on being referred to a service if their referral has come from someone that they know, that they have a relationship with. So for us, when we think about an integrated student support approach, there's 4 kind of main buckets that we think about this type of redesign work. The first is education, career, and financial planning. And this again is, clearly very much tied to the guided pathways piece. How do we make sure that students begin with the end in mind, that we're able to really clarify their paths, and that there's attention to the career piece and the financial component as well early on in their connection to the institution. The second component is around the kind of coaching, advising, counseling aspect of this, moving to more holistic, more proactive forms of that. The third is early alert or kind of risk targeting. And this isn't just about that you have some technology where you raise a flag. It's really about how do we tie evidence-based interventions to students that need them when they need them, when an alert is raised. And sometimes I think, we focus on some of our institutions have been really excited to set up an early alert process without thinking about what happens when the flag's raised. So then they started, 10,000 flags are raised, and then there's a lot of kind of challenge, how do we actually tie this to interventions that we know work for which students, which takes a lot more kind of behind the scenes work than just setting up a process for early alert. And then finally, transfer processes and labor market alignment. And this, for us, again, is, with the idea of beginning with the end in mind, getting students really clear so that they know how they will eventually transition smoothly and efficiently, either to their four-year institution or into the labor market with the possibility of economic mobility. So, what does this look like? I like to compare, okay, well, what's the status quo? What could this look like differently? And so this slide does this, and I won't read through all of it, but, this is where we moved from things like, students kind of don't have a clear path. It's hard for them to see, all the things that we'll need, how they're going to get there, when they will get there, to moving to where they really have clear academic plans all the way through completion that aligns with career goals that they've already explored. Also things like, sometimes advisors currently may be able to troubleshoot student issues if the student raises them to the advisor. Well, how can we move to that actually being more of a process where there can be a more proactive and personalized approach, whether it's some of our institutions doing intake surveys, doing non-cognitive intake surveys, other ways to gain the information about the students so that we know how best to connect them with supports before they even know them, and so they don't necessarily even have to ask for help, maybe even being even more proactive with that. The last one up there was around kind of, I think sometimes we view advising as registration clerks, but moving to actually them being seen as kind of guides or coaches of the student's experience. We like to, this is another piece that comes from CCRC, and I like this one because it drills down a little more, and it says advising as teaching, but I think we could also say student support. And that's, this idea of moving from transactional to developmental. We're really focused more on kind of the skill building piece, how we kind of create opportunities for the students to reflect and problem solve. And that means really changing the way that we interact with students. And so for a lot of the advisors that we've been working with, that is a new way of interacting with students. For some, it's not. For some, they were maybe trained that way. But for others, they have come through the job and are really used to being kind of registration clerks and having certain types of transactional interactions. And so, for example, one of our institutions, they were like, I don't know how to have career conversations with students. I was never taught that. So there's a lot of kind of professional development that needs to go into this work to move to this more kind of teaching philosophy. Some of the lessons as our institutions have engaged in this work is, to the point that I was just saying, the importance of things like protocols or advisor toolkits or student support. It's even service staff, that there's kind of a way to be more consistent in really helping them know how to have those more developmental conversations with students. This also means, more professional development, the use of data. That's been a big focus as well, is how do we actually enable more staff, not just IR, more staff across the institution to understand the data, to be a part of making meaning of the data about their students, and figuring out how to really use that in their jobs. This is just an example. I talked about kind of protocol from Montgomery County. They develop these protocols for advisors for different milestone markers with students, to give them, again, a way for advisors to kind of have a way of having those more developmental conversations, creating more consistency across advisors. And this is paired with a lot of other kind of protocols they had around note-taking, sharing notes, and different pieces like that. I did want to note about technology because, technology has an important role in this. It's not the most important role, though. And it's not about, we're not here to say you need to buy some new fancy technology, because there are lots of shiny things out there, right? But we know that technology does help because, as we said before, we have to find some ways of creating some efficiencies to free up the time for staff to have and faculty to have these more meaningful interactions. So that's where the technology can help. Technology, it can help students track their own progress. It can help connect them with the supports they need. It can be a kind of a helpful communication mechanism. There may be, again, when we think about high touch, low touch, some students may not need the high touch. There could be some kind of rote tasks that they can do on their own outside of an advising session or kind of a referral session that could free up the time to focus on some more of these aspects. And then the technology is also, a really important part for a lot of our institutions on how they empower their faculty and staff to really have the information they need to have those meaningful conversations with students. And so that the student isn't retelling their story every time, and so that faculty and staff have a way of communicating with each other as we build this kind of more cohesive support structure for students. A quick note on the pathways connection, and I think that Christine hit on this, and it's probably obvious the connection, but I do like to emphasize, for me, and I'm biased because this is the work that I do every day, that I think that this piece around focusing on the advising and student support redesign is so critical to the pathways, because really you can have, not to simplify it, and don't let Javis Jenkins hear me say this, but you could have the most beautiful program maps in the world, but if you don't have the structures, if you don't have the people in place to really help students get on the path and keep them on the path, then it won't have the impact that we're really looking for. And so that's really the focus of the work here is, how do we focus on those two pieces, those two middle pieces of pathways work, and really to, again, accelerate hopefully the guided pathways work that you're already doing, that you see it as a seamless whole, because I want to make sure that people don't feel like we're coming to tell you you need to add a new initiative, right? Because I saw a lot of nods when we talked about initiative fatigue. This type of redesign work isn't a new initiative. This is just how you do or operationalize your guided pathways work. So like hopefully if that's the umbrella of work that is familiar at your institution, and we'll talk about this with communication later, this is just part of that. This isn't just another new thing. So finding the ways to really knit it all together is important. I really like to make sure, we know this is hard work. This isn't easy. It's not just about some, little bit of reorganization. This is really challenging, and I think this is why it's challenging, because we're really seeking a transformative change with this type of redesign. And transformative change is defined, and there's an organizational kind of theory person, Adriana Kizar, who really uses this model. That it really requires three types of change. The first is structural change. And sometimes that can be the easiest. I mean, nothing of this is really easy. But that's where we're, kind of making some changes to whether it's physical structures, processes, and the way kind of people are set up to do this work. That's kind of the structural piece. But then ultimately we need to get to making actual process changes. And this is more like behavioral change. This is that we're really changing the way that people operate, the way that they do their jobs on an individual level. But that transformative change won't occur, it won't stick, if there isn't also attitudinal change, so that people really view their work in a new way. And I think that that's both what's hard about this work, but also when we can attend to all three of these, when we can recognize that we're going to be asking people to do their jobs differently, that's going to feel uncomfortable. Like this is where I think it makes it more clear where some of the barriers come from in doing this type of work. So I just wanted to give an example, and I know you all read the Community College of Philadelphia case study. I know you all read it, right? Yes, because we all do the pre-reading. But if not, maybe you'll be interested in going back to read it after today. Community College of Philadelphia is one of our IPASS institutions, so they've been doing this work. Well, they've been in the grant for 2.5 years, but they've been doing trying to do this type of redesign work for more years than that. So, in the case study, you probably, again, those who read it were familiar with this, but, when we think about how to break out those different types of changes. So for them, they were focused on a couple areas. One was the technology piece. They wanted to streamline that so that faculty and staff had more access to the data, and students had a clear way, instead of opening 14 different technologies to learn about one student, opening one technology, and the students can go to one place. They also moved to making some things mandatory. These are some of those structural changes. They wanted to make mandatory advisor meetings, particularly for at enrollment, and then also kind of when they wanted to withdraw from a class, they set up some criteria for that. They also made it mandatory that they all had to develop a program plan. All new students had to develop a program plan. They did some reorganization of advisors, so they assigned advisors to programs. So it was a kind of a hybrid, moved it to a more of a hybrid advising model. Established some cross-functional working groups. They have new full-time professional advisors who are actually tenured faculty lines, and merged academic and student success. So now they have a VP that's over both of those areas. So those are some pretty significant structural changes. But again, we know that that's not enough. They could have just done that and stopped there, and probably may not have been successful, because what they needed to do was really change what people did with that new structure. So, whether it's making sure that people use the technology more frequently, and in the case study it talks about some of the different trainings that they did, using the case notes, really training advisors to have more program-specific advising than just kind of being generalist registration-focused advisors, and shifting to that more developmental advising. And then, finally, the attitudinal piece for them was really important. And for them, it was, and I think some of it was about, bringing both academic and student services together, but they wanted people to really view collaboration and cross-functional communication, talking across the sides, as a part of their job, as valuable, and like, it is my responsibility and part of my job to do that. And then also, they started, 5 years ago, whatever, really thinking this is going to be a technology reform, right? Because they bought some new technology. They're like, this is a technology-led process. And the attitudinal shift for them was realizing, no, this is a people process redesign. And everyone like recognizing that and owning, like, yes, this is gonna change the way we do our work, and that we're all kind of a part of this larger whole. This is just a chart that they use to talk a little bit about how they did that. You know, I think for many institutions, and you've probably got different committee structures already on campus, for them, you know, they were in Achieving the Dream. So they had kind of an Achieving the Dream core team. They were doing guided pathways, so they had like a guided pathways team. They were doing this IPASS work, their integrated student support. They had an integrated student support team, but they realized that wasn't working. So what the VP for Academic and Student Success did was create the middle group, which was the Student Success, he called it my 2.0 group, Student Success 2.0, had representatives of all these different buckets of work into that one kind of managing, overarching group, so that there was a lot more streamline and consistency in how each of those projects were being implemented. I have just one more example that I was going to share, and you know, these are a few more. This one's a little bit more focused on the advising piece. So again, you know, we're talking about not just advising. It's not just about changing what advisors do. We're talking about all the way that we really do student supports as a whole. But this is an interesting model because they moved to what they called an integrated advising model. And these were some of the kind of core pieces of their advising model, really focusing on that advising as teaching piece. They moved to having academic advisors partnered with faculty mentors because faculty advising was still a part of their contract. But they kind of shifted so that the students were really able to get from the professional advisors, you know, a lot of the kind of more broad kind of institutional services, exposure to that, exposure to career counseling and things like that, so that then really with the faculty mentors, it could really be program specific in the advising sessions that they had. These are just, again, another example of how they split out their outcomes and their, for the faculty mentors and for the student mentees. They also did a student intake, and this goes back to the point of, you know, how do we really get information about our students earlier? So at the point of orientation, they give students a 12-question non-cognitive survey, and they use that to connect them to services early on. So this is just an example. I like this example because it shows all of the different departments that are involved in this. So each of those departments had a question tied to the survey, and if the survey results indicated that they needed follow-up from that department needed to create their own protocol for, okay, what happens when it's raised to us that a student needs to be connected? And so I like this because it shows, again, it's not just about advising. This is a holistic approach that really spans the whole institution. And if you're interested in this, again, any of these examples, if you're interested in them, you know, let me know because we can connect you with more, you know, Northeast Wisconsin always shares their survey instrument and is great about sharing other things too from their work. The last piece for Northeast Wisconsin, again, similar to CCP, I like showing a little bit of the how because I think that's important. So for them, you know, they also had so many different initiatives going on and there's different committees attached to each initiative. It was so important for them to like first come up with, well, what is our vision for our guided pathways work? And what are all the pieces that fit to this? Because we want to make sure everyone knows that this is all interconnected and their work is a part of a larger whole. So this is the graphic that they use to kind of help people see themselves in the work and know how it all fit together. This is just a shout out to the toolkit. We talk about these different phases of the work, and this is something that we'll kind of come back to throughout the day. And you'll see that it's a cycle because we know, this work is not linear. You know, that would be great if it was. Christine keeps telling me she's going to give me a magic wand to make everything easier, but she hasn't come through with that yet. So you know, recognizing that this work is linear, working through kind of the importance of the discovery and planning process. That's what we're going to focus a little bit more on this morning. Development and testing, actually launching the work, but then that importance of always focused on refining the work. And as soon as you refine it, that means you've identified some new piece that you need to do some deeper design work on and cycle back through the process. On that note, and I just have a few, oops, sorry, going too fast. My last three slides are just about what is some of the lessons learned from institutions who have been doing this work. So this is what colleges have come to us saying that they need as they think about doing this work. And I've highlighted just a few. One is creating the vision for their redesign. We know from research on change leadership, being able to articulate a clear, aligned vision of where we're going, like what is that desired future state? If people in the institution don't know what we're striving for, it's hard to be a part of getting there. So the importance of that vision piece. Aligning it with other initiatives and doing that really early on. Like a lot of these are about communication, but how do we make sure that people see this as a cohesive whole and how it all fits together? They also recognize the importance of focusing on how this is changing the roles and perhaps creating new roles. And by roles, I don't necessarily mean like budget lines, but this means shifting the way people do their jobs, and it may mean kind of shifting the focus of what people do. We have a lot of institutions who do some work around kind of reallocating positions to focus on different pieces, whether it's moving from orientation staff, making them more navigators of the student experience, changing the onboarding piece, but there's kind of a piece around changing roles here. The change leadership work, we know, I think, from the fact that this is really about changing the people and process and attitudes, the change leadership, attention to that throughout the whole process is really critical, and not just at the top, right? That kind of attention to change management has got to be throughout the whole institution. And then finally, knowing our students. Sometimes we design the processes that work the best for the status quo and for what staff expectations are. How do we really start with what we know about our students, learning about what our students need and the processes that will work best for them as we think about this. Some more lessons, but again, I'm going to be sending these slides out so you can take a deeper look, and I'm sure some of this will kind of come out for you throughout the day. We know that this is intensive work. And when we think about the resources, there's been some studies on return of investment. There's been some kind of business model studies done on the IPASS colleges. And what they found was the largest kind of resource expenditure was not technology. It wasn't buying some new product. It really was staff time to do this redesign work. We also know about the vision piece, that just how important that is. And that how important it is to generate that buy-in by really connecting it to our understanding of how this work will impact individuals' daily work. The final thing I'll say, and this came up in the Community College of Philadelphia case study, the importance of being able to say, I don't know yet. What was the quote in the case study? It was something like, don't be afraid of imperfection. And sometimes the transparency of saying, we don't have all the answers, but we're going to build them together, can go a lot farther than either pretending we don't have the answers or not giving enough information about the changes that are coming. My last slide, I'm going to have one of your peers to talk a little bit about what they think about this work. My last slide is just around the leadership piece, and this is something we have a handout about and kind of a discussion tool for your team. We like to focus on the fact that this requires a certain type of leadership. This type of redesign really requires leadership that's not technical, doesn't view this as a problem around which we can flip a switch, that it's just about either, decreeing from above and that's how it happens. This really requires adaptive leadership, which recognizes that this is about people and processes, and kind of recognizes that this is a broader kind of transformation work. CCRC did a study of some institutions, and it was important to note when we say leadership and their role of adaptive leadership, it's not just about adaptive leadership at the top, though that is really important. But it's really important that that's aligned throughout the institution. So they did this study and they found some institutions, maybe presidential type of leadership, maybe they were adaptive at the top, but the folks on the ground didn't understand that this was really about people and process. Similarly, there's been the other way, where either they're both kind of view this as a technical change, we make some changes, we flip a switch and we're good. Or where, the folks at the top think, oh, well, you all just do this, it'll just happen, right? And people on the ground are like, no, this really requires a lot of attention to the fact that we're asking people to change the way they do their work. And so, of course, visionary, like where there was adaptive, where people understood this and approached this from an adaptive perspective at both the top and throughout the institution, was, of course, where they could make the most shifts. one thing I like to say is when they did this longitudinal study, those that were either presidential, where it was adaptive at the top and more technical at the lower parts of the organization, or where it was divided, both of those were there were some strategies that they used to move to a more visionary place. So even if you're not visionary, if you don't think you have visionary kind of approach to this work right now at your institution, all hope is not lost. Like there are some key things that can be done, but I think attending to, I like putting this in people's heads because it does get more at the change management role that you all will need to play as you are really guiding this work on your campus. So that was my talking at you. Is everyone doing okay? Yes, okay, good. People are still awake, nodding their heads. So, gather your questions. Think about what questions you have. In the meantime, I'm going to ask one of your peers who came to our institute, Achieving the Dream. We had an institute. I know there was about 14 reps from New Jersey that came. We had an institute, kind of national institute in New Orleans in early October. Come on down, Nicole. And so throughout the day, we're going to have a couple of those folks kind of share some of their thoughts since they've been kind of exposed to this and been thinking about what this means for their campus. So you can hear a little bit from the peers, because I know it's, you're hearing from me and it's like, what do you know? You're not at our campus, but someone from one of your peers. Go ahead, Nicole.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Killian. I'm from Mercer County Community College, and I'm a success coach there. And I'd like to thank Mayanne and the center for allowing me to share some of the takeaway points that I gathered at, it was called Tech Buy-In, one of the workshops that they talked about. How do you get people to buy into your technology? Now, we all know, I'm sure every single college here has some kind of technology that everybody was really excited about when it was first implemented. And it didn't maybe have the buy-in from the students. So I was really interested in this. I'm an anthropologist, so I wanted to see, how do we change our culture? What were some of the talking points for changing the culture? And the first one was a very obvious point. It was, don't go to IT, don't go to administration when you're looking at new technology. Go to your end users, go to your students. Your students are the ones that are going to use it. We all kind of have this idea that, oh, technology, our millennials, they love it. It's, this new thing that we have, it's going to be the new Snapchat for them, right? They're just going to go crazy over this. And then we show them and they're like, I don't know how to use it. I work with students, we have Blackboard. I think Blackboard is amazing. I'm like, just go in here and navigate around. And they're like, I can't find the assignments. I'm like, but the tab says assignments. Well, I didn't know if I was supposed to click that button. Really, you just Googled something for 10 minutes and, went to all these different apps, but you couldn't figure this out. So a lot of times we think from an administrative point of view, or our IT people think all the bells and whistles, they're gonna love this. And then it falls flat. So what the suggestion was is go to the students, go to your end users, because if you don't get faculty to buy into it, you're not getting anybody to use this. So go to your end users, go to your students, find out what they want. So have your technology fit the vision of what your vision is. How do we want to use this technology? Not, we have this technology, now how are we going to use it? So that was one of the, and again, you hear it and you're like, well, that's obvious. Why aren't we doing this? But we're not always doing this. The second point was, instead of buying new technology, check with your vendor that you're using already. So again, we're using Blackboard, we're using Student Planner at Mercer, and we go to these conferences and everything's wonderful. And oh, look at the bells and whistles on this one. This is going to revolutionize advising. Instead, go to Blackboard, go to Student Planner, ask them. We haven't had an upgrade in 2 years. What are your new products? What can you do for us? Instead of going and buying Canvas or Moodle or another student planner. Stick with the one you have and see if you can upgrade. Because the reason for that is, again, how many people have had this, what did you call it, the fatigue, the initiative fatigue? Oh, great, a new tech tool, great. We had Canvas last year, now we have Blackboard. I'm not gonna get too used to it because we're gonna move to Moodle or we're gonna move to a different platform next year. So I'm not gonna get too used to it because we always move. So if you have the same platform, it gives that continuity. It gives oh, okay, this is just an upgrade. This is the iPhone 8 instead of the iPhone 7, instead of the Galaxy. So using these kind of ideas of stay with them. If your vendor, they might have some new things that you just didn't know about because your institution hasn't explored their upgrades. And the last one was, this was my favorite because again, this is just, it just seems so obvious. Why aren't we doing this? Instead of going, when you're running your pilots, instead of going to your most receptive and your most energetic faculty to have them pilot it, go to your most resistant. If you can get your most resistant to buy in, if they see how it can benefit them, how it's not going to make their job any more difficult, it's actually going to make their job easier, how it can serve and benefit their students, they are going to buy into it. If you get the, I'm looking at Mercer, we all know who those people are in our chemistry class, our chemistry department. If we get these two professors, if we get them to buy into student planner, the entire college will be overnight. Everybody be on it. It will be the new Snapchat. So these were some of the ideas that they were talking about. And honestly, they all fit into some of the things that Mayanne was saying earlier about the structural change. That's using the end users, going to the end users first. That's your structural change. Your process change is, again, working with your vendor. We already have a process involved. Do we need to tweak it or do we need to go for a new product? And then the attitudinal change, that's getting your most resistant people to buy into it. Because again, we all have seen it. Great tool, you know, I have a colleague from IT, it's great. And I look at it, I'm like, oh, this is wonderful, this is wonderful. Because I'm thinking more about innovation and how can I reach my students in different ways. And I'm like, this is great, this is great. And then I go and I sit in the adjunct office and they're like, this new blah, blah, blah tool that they're making us do. They're not paying us for this. Why do we have to learn all this new stuff? They're going to change it next year. So if we do that, if we have that attitudinal change, that's how a cultural change starts. And a few things, never give an anthropologist a microphone and an audience that can't leave. But that's how culture changes. It's not, again, you know, the 60s revolution, that didn't start because somebody at the top said, we're going to change. It started at grassroots. So we need to start thinking more grassroots, especially with technology. Even though we think it should be administrative and IT, maybe we should start thinking more grassroots.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right. Thank you, Nicole. Camille. I like the standing ovation from her team. That's great. Okay, so what about others? You know, kind of what stood out from what I've kind of presented so far today? What's exciting about this work? What anxieties do you have? Kind of what are some of your reactions? And Camille will run the mic over to you. While you're gathering your thoughts, because I know you have them, I just wanted to emphasize, you know, Nicole mentioned about I think now you've heard several times this idea of the vision, like how important like that is before either the technology piece or, you know, before we really, you know, try to make ad hoc changes, that we've really got a clear, you know, vision for where we want to go so that we can align the changes to that. Did that give you enough time to think of something? So, okay, then we'll talk via raising hands. How many people are feeling excited about doing this type of redesign work on your campus? And how many people have some reservations? You can raise your hand for both. And what are some of those things? So what for those who raised your hand about what was exciting, what is exciting about this? Again, you may already be doing some of this work and it feels like it's just right in line, or there may be something new that you're excited to be bringing back to your institution.
I did it. I took one for the team. So we invited faculty, especially the faculty that didn't buy in, hated advising and hated this and hated that. We begged them to be a part of our team as we were redesigning our model. Yeah. They wouldn't come to the table. Mm-hmm. So we had the faculty who were already advising, were already proactive and involved. So we reached out to these people and we said, we need that feedback from you. We need to understand why advising is tough for you and what we can do to change it. And they didn't come to the table. Any suggestions?
Yeah. I can answer, but anyone else either second that or have a good strategy that you've used? Back here.
So thank you for your question. So I would say, especially for looking at the faculty viewpoint, so I'm not faculty as well, so I work full-time just as staff at my college. So especially with faculty, depending on their contracts and their obligations, they're burdened with preparing lesson plans, teaching the courses. I was hearing yesterday, some of my colleagues and I were speaking with one of the faculty at Mercer and just explaining how the first 2 weeks of the semester are the most intensive, the last week with final exams. So potentially inviting them to meetings and inviting them to be involved could add an extra time commitment on their plates. So what may be helpful is sending out some sort of electronic survey to get their input that way, or figuring out another strategy that they could give their input in a way that takes the least amount of time. So.
So just to add on to that, I was at a or in New Orleans, and they talked about faculty buy-in. And so one of the suggestions was to have a clear protocol of what was expected for the faculty. So for instance, I'm a biologist, and there are so many different ways and career pathways for biology. So some of them I'm very well versed in, and others I really have no idea. And so the thought of trying to advise some students on some of these obscure things is a little scary. And so when talking about faculty buy-in, to understand exactly what I'm required to talk about, giving them tools to go find the information if they're worried about certain things. But it was mainly kind of a clear idea of, I'm not supposed to help with enrollment, or I'm not supposed to help with registration. These ideas were, you're already talking to your students now. Let's see how we can formalize it without adding on too much work for you.
Great. Those are two great suggestions. Well, one other thing I like to talk about with faculty buy-in is, and this will come up a little bit more this afternoon with the communication piece, the importance of being able to articulate the why. For a lot of people, they may just initially see things as change, like, oh, it's another change, I don't have time. But the why is really important. And the other thing is that a lot of the research into change leadership has found that there's really actually very few people that are true resistors, that really just wake up in the morning and are determined to resist any change. There may be a lot of noisy people that on the surface look like they're resistors, but it's usually because there's some underlying barrier. And it may not be the thing they're saying. They may be saying that I don't have time, but there may be something else. So to be able to ask, okay, I'm wondering, why are they saying that? Well, it's not my job. Why are they saying that? A lot of what usually when you do, and sometimes we do this with institutions, we do like a root causes tree. We start, and you could do this yourself, start with all those reasons you've heard, those resistant reasons, and then ask yourself why 3 times. So it's not my job. All right, why is that for that person a barrier? Why is that? Usually it all trickles down to some piece around communication. They're not getting some sort of information. They're not connected in some way. But doing that type of root causes can help you think of other strategies that you need to be using to address them, and whether it's kind of individual conversations or kind of the way that the change in the work is being messaged to them. So we're going to kind of move on to thinking more about the homework that you did, the discovery inventory. Oh, yes. Did you want to share something?
Hi, this is just a question based on what you just said. At our school, there are some faculty who would be open to this. However, according to the faculty contract, there's no advising. And most of the faculty are not interested in jumping into that. As this gentleman said, it adds more work to their day, but also, and as the young woman over there said, it's also maybe something they're a little fearful about. So to go from where they're at to
Yeah.
where we're talking about,
Yeah.
you know, and in terms of the people that are working on this,
Yeah.
it really becomes more of a negotiation thing, which is
Yeah.
out of our control. So it's more complicated, I think, in some situations. I don't know how many colleges have that in the contract, but
Yeah.
it becomes a big roadblock.
The union piece is a really big one, and that I know for the Community College of Philadelphia, that's why it took so many years for them to make this happen. And it happened in the way that it is now. And I mean, they're still working towards it. I mean, for them, it was a lot. When I talked to their VP for academic and student success, he's like, patience. That's the only thing I can say. That it did require time, but it also required for them to generate the buy-in with some key stakeholders. So the fact that you have some faculty that are interested in this, so having a little of that, kind of groundwork in terms of generating some buy-in, and then also having that vision, and not a vision that like this is where we're going into story. But like, this is what we're striving for. How can we contribute to this? Like, what feedback? Making it more of a shared ownership, but starting with something really solid so that it wasn't just we want to change advising. It was, this is the student experience that we seek. And for Sam at CCP, he said, people couldn't argue when we talked about this new student experience. Faculty, they liked that idea of what that student experience could be. So, really grounding it with, this is what we want for the students. For them, it was one of the ways that they were able, and then it was time and persistence and patience. So I wanted to oh yes, okay. No.
Thank you. Faculty and administration as well. Two real quick points. One, and I hesitate using the word spin, but just for lack of a better, is you're already doing this. You're already doing this.
Yeah.
You're already doing this. The other point is that I think all too often, and again, this was something that I had to circle back and kind of regroup on. When you're bringing faculty into the fold, I think all too often we may do a very good job with the initial initiation and training, but then we don't sustain that contemporaneous to the actual experience that they have to use the tool. And I just, I'm doing this with the early warning system and realizing that the application that we're using, we talked about it, they got it initially. Now they're in the throes and they're seeing why they need to use it. And I'm seeing that I have to circle now back and reinforce.
Right.
So,
yes, that was a perfect setup for Chapter 7 of the toolkit, which is on training and professional development, which is right in line with what you're saying and really emphasizes that the training and professional development piece has to be ongoing. We can't kind of, doesn't just happen at the launch of something, it has to be consistent throughout. There was something else that you said that I was going to comment on, but now I've forgotten. It will come back to me. So hopefully this, again, is just kind of the starting point for you all as you think about this work. I want to point you to one paper that's in the middle of your table. It's called Technology Mediated Advising and Student Support, an Institutional Self-Assessment. So I wanted to kind of put this on your radar at this point. We're not going to do anything with it. What we are going to ask is that you use it in between the first and second institute. This is a great tool that came out of the Community College Research Center, and I know that you probably feel like you're getting a different rubric and assessment every other day. This one, I think, is a really helpful discussion tool for you to take back. If this is the guiding team for your work at your institution, maybe it's this team that needs to do this type of self-assessment of the institution. Maybe there's others on campus that you want to bring into this conversation. But it has this rubric, and it really helps walk through. It does two things. One, it helps show what do we mean by good. So it's got the exemplary column. Like, what are we really striving for in this type of SIP approach to advising and student support? But the other thing it does is it helps you all hopefully come to consensus on, well, where is our institution right now? Like, if we were to kind of plot ourselves based on this rubric, and it's just that 2-page rubric, where would we be? Because that also helps inform how you need to get there. What things you need to do in order to move up in the rubric. So I'm kind of leaving this with you as a tool, and we are going to ask that you come back to the second institute having done this at your institution, so it will really help inform the action plan that you start developing. But again, hopefully as you look at it, it does help kind of solidify, well, what are we really driving towards with this work? All right, so I know you are tired of hearing me talk. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Julia to take us through the next activity that we'll be doing from now until lunch.
So this is the part where you start to earn your lunch. So for the next, I'm sorry about this, but for the next hour and 20 minutes, you're going to be working pretty hard. So we've got a couple of activities to set up to get you started. But so we're talking about the discovery process, and it's part of planning, but we've pulled it out, and we really focus on it in this work, because a lot of the time we go to colleges and they're talking about, oh, we're doing advising redesign, and then we ask them specific questions, and it turns out they're not on the same page. They're talking about something completely different from each other, and they're not quite there yet. So we have to kind of take a step back and focus more about discovering what exists now, and then move towards the planning phase. So before we go into the activity, I know some of you did the pre-work, which was the discovery inventory. Others may have looked at it but haven't completed it yet. So that's going to be part of the next activity. But I do want to ask Rebecca Royal from Union. I know the Union did complete the pre-work activity, so I just wanted to see if you could share some of your thoughts and experience on that.
Thank you very much. And before I say anything, I do want to say thank you to Christine Harrington, because she really has been so supportive throughout all last year and all the work we did with Guided Pathways. So thank you so much. I think we should all give her a big round of round of applause. So where we are at Union is we did implement Guided Pathways this past year. We did our maps. We have them online. We do use student planning. We implemented that this past year as well. So we are kind of moving along, but we're at the point where I think we're not sure if we're implementing it in the right way. And I think we need to work on our intake process and our advising process a little bit more. So this inventory actually was really helpful for us. So we did have a group that sat down and went through it, and we kind of looked at where we were, and we came up with some issues that we have that we want to talk about in terms of enrollment, in terms of advising. And I think the next thing we want to do is include our faculty in this discussion as well. We do have some faculty here today. So I think it was very valuable for us, and I think we're going to continue to use it on our campus, I think. Okay, that's it.
So for those, thank you very much. For those of you who haven't done it yet, it's a lot of fun, clearly, because she was smiling throughout the whole thing. So we did ask, this was part of the pre-work for our last institute in early October, and we found that there were a few colleges, we will not name names, who emailed it round to people and said, fill out your part, you fill out your part, and then we'll come together at the institute. When they came together, they realized they got pieces wrong, they'd missed things out, they realized there was a lot of overlap. So it really is important to fill this out together as a team so that you can get that on the same page. So going into the first activity. So for those of you that completed the discovery inventory, it's going to be more of a reflection based on the questions that we have up here. So what was most challenging for you as you were going through and doing this? What pain points did you identify for students in certain areas of the process? And were there underlying causes for that? So if students aren't coming to use your services, what is the reason for that? Is it communication? Is it something to do with how they feel about coming to ask for support? And if you don't know the answer, what information do you need to be able to answer those questions? For those of you that didn't complete the homework and have just looked at it, what we want you to do is kind of, as a group, talk about some component of it and have some of these reflection questions. So how do you feel this activity would go down at your institution? How would you approach it? What challenges would come up from that? Do you know that there are pain points already based on these questions? If so, how do you know? And if not, what data do you need to collect, or what do you need to do to get that information? So we're going to spend about 15 minutes doing this. We are not going to have a report out at this point in time, but we are going to have one later. So again, be prepared to speak. For those of you who haven't got the discovery document, it is actually in the toolkit. So it's pages 21 to 33. And you can pick which component you want to talk about. So 15 minutes, and we will come back together, and I've got a couple of slides that I'm going to present to you, and then we'll get back into another activity. So 15 minutes. Okay. Oh, there we go. So I'm sorry to cut the conversation short. We're going to come back together for a few more minutes, and then we can go back into some of the discussions around this, but we want to take the focus and narrow it a little bit. So I did lie. I would like two people to briefly share something that they were talking about at their table. So Camille's coming around again with the microphone. So is there anyone who really wants to share with the large group what their conversation was about? There are people still talking, and I will gravitate to them if they're because they clearly have something to share. Does anyone want to share? Camille, pick a table. We're going to start bribing you. So we have things called achievements up front, and the person who speaks will get one of these wonderful prizes, very sought after. Come on now. There we go. Yep. Okay, we have one back here, and then we'll come to you.
Okay. We're talking about the fact that some of the things that are in our way here, are basically existing policies that the Board of Trustees actually has in their packet that we have to try and get around. But first we have to get the board to change those policies, right? And then after that, one of the other major concerns we have is being able to communicate with the students, because we don't have a pure CRM. We've got other ways that we can get to the students through their portal accounts or their email addresses, but unfortunately, quite often they ignore the information that's coming to them through their school email account, because that's the one they don't use. They use their Gmail account, or they use whatever. Anybody use AOL anymore? Right.
Probably not the students.
Right. So they don't get the information that we're sending out to them. So we're trying to get IT to actually, all right, what's the format we're supposed to be using to communicate to all of our students?
That's great. That is a very common challenge, especially the communication to students piece. There's a lot of people saying emails don't work with students, especially the younger ones nowadays. And so colleges that we've been working with have started asking students in their intake surveys, how do you want us to communicate with you? What email address do you want us to use? And so some of them are saying, maybe we don't go with the college email. Maybe we just don't. So there's all these questions that people are starting to ask.
Well, we're very passionate about this. We all think it's a great idea at Rowan College, Gloucester County. We're really in the first box intake survey. If you know, there's box one, the application placement test scores. What do you do with admissions? There's a new benchmarking throughout the state. So many of us are knee deep in trying to figure that out and how that will be implemented. So the fatigue of competing projects that are large and labor intensive kind of tend to fall on the same people to champion. So that's one challenge. The other is we don't have an intake process, and our undecided students, we feel like we just really, that's the elephant in the room for us. If we could get in and begin to really, truly assist them in getting on a pathway early on, that they, boy, if we could do one thing this year, and so I think that's where our emphasis is going to be, just out of the box with our discussion just now at the table. But we're happy to be here.
Good, there we go. So it's good that you've identified one piece that you can focus on, because that is what I'm going to be asking you to do. So congratulations for being a head start. So there's a couple of slides I want to share, just reflecting on things we've learned about a good discovery process from the 26 colleges we've been working with, but also some of the others we've worked with outside of the IPASS project. So the purpose of a discovery process is really to understand and reflect on what the existing process is, what you currently have, what the students currently experience. From that, you can identify the gaps and the challenges that both students, advisors, library staff, faculty all have, and some of those trouble spots that you might need to address first. It also helps us all get on the same page, as I've said before. It's a really critical piece of it. I heard people talking about, well, what is advising? Well, faculty, even if it's not in their contract, they advise. My husband is an adjunct faculty member. He advises. It is not in his contract, but students come to him and ask him for advice, and he is more than happy to talk to them. So it is just a reality of the work that people do who are on campus every day. So here's a couple of lessons. They're a little bit small, that we've learned about the discovery and planning process. So I'm not going to go through all of them. There's a lot. We talked a bit about the guiding team. And it's a really critical piece. One thing we noticed from the colleges that they attended the Institute earlier this month, a lot of them said in the evaluation, I wish I'd brought X. I wish I'd brought IT. I wish I'd brought the data person. I wish more faculty had been here. Or we didn't have a decision maker. One college sent just counselors and coaches, and they were sitting there like, we have great ideas. No one can make this happen that's at the table here. So making sure that those decision makers and influencers are all in the conversation. So the people who can get buy-in from others, the influencers, the people who have the authority to actually say, yes, we're going to do this, they have to be at the table too. Getting to know your students and what they actually experience. And I'm going to talk a bit about this on another slide, but that is really critical to this part of the process and is actually included in your toolkit. Build it and they will come. This is the approach that a lot of colleges have taken with support services. They kind of put them out there, they have a few posters, they talk about them at orientation, and then they just kind of wait for students to come. And that's been transitioning, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, as people realize that doesn't work for students. I would argue it doesn't work for faculty, staff, and administrators either. So we're all human. We all have a lot to do. We're not going to kind of always volunteer to do additional things. So this goes especially to things like professional development. So just because you're offering it and just because you know it's valuable doesn't mean everyone's going to be able to come or is going to see that value. And so building that intentionally into faculty contracts, into expectations, into new roles, those kind of things are really critical to make sure that what you build actually gets used. One thing that we've learned is that people love to celebrate when things happen, but we're very bad at doing it. And that goes for our team as well. So we're busy. We don't have time to pause and reflect and celebrate when things go right. But it really does help to maintain that momentum going forward, especially as this is going to be a long-term project. This doesn't happen in 1 or 2 years. And so to keep people excited about it, it's really important to celebrate when people do good work. And that could be just bringing cupcakes to a meeting and saying thank you. Like it can be small, it can be large, whatever works for your college. And then making sure that faculty and staff, when we're giving them data, so a lot of colleges jump straight into, we want to do predictive analytics. Well, great. What does that mean? What does that look like? What does this specific data point actually mean, and how do you use it in your decisions on a daily basis? Training people how to use that before you actually roll it out, or even sometimes start really talking about what it's going to look like, is really helpful, so that when it starts coming, they're excited for it because they know that they can use it and how it's going to help. And then one final thing, one aha moment that came out of one of the sessions we did with Columbus State Community College in Ohio. there was a guy who works with students on a daily basis. He was an advisor, and he said, what I get is students coming to me saying they're tired of telling their story to different people on campus. They see us as one unit. They tell us, and they assume they've told the college. But then they have to go around and tell their story again and again. And for some students, that is emotionally draining. And so what students want is to tell their story one time, and for that to then inform the support they get. And so as we're thinking of this new design and the redesign, keep that front and center. So I said getting to know your students is important. In the past, some of this has been starting with disaggregate your data, look at your data, see how students progress through, and that is really critical. But there's also the other piece of where are they coming from? Who are they? What do they value? What do they care about? What responsibilities do they have outside of the college? What do they think they struggle with most? What does the data show that they do struggle with most? How do they think they use your supports? So you can get that through actually asking them, interviews, surveys, those kind of things. But then how do they actually use them? So as when you ask people how they experience something, they may not remember certain things. They may remember one piece that went really bad, but the rest of it was actually pretty smooth. Or maybe they forgot one small thing that was bad because they were so focused on one thing, another thing. And so actually observing how your students move through certain processes is really critical as a complement to what they think, how they think they use your services. And so one approach that we've used with our IPASS colleges and some others is design thinking. And it's a creative problem-solving process that is intended to really kind of let people get loose and start thinking about some great ideas and think outside the box. This does also demand that the culture is kind of okay with the learning process rather than a culture of blame, but it can also help to create that culture on campus as well. And so design thinking is kind of a process. There's certain steps that you follow, and it can like follow those, or it doesn't have to. So the way we have used it with a lot of colleges is to pull out certain tools from the process and embed them in the college's own discovery and planning process. So the main benefit for discovery is they have a load of different ways and different specific techniques for example, how to interview students or how to interview people well to get the answers you need, how to design surveys, asking students to self-journal their experience so that then you can use that. Having focus groups that aren't groupthink or don't just stay on the surface. And then there's the third-party understanding of the student experience, and there's tools for that as well. So shadowing or observing, and you can have your own, you can do that yourself, you can hire external companies to do it. It's really, there's just protocols that you can follow to make sure it's useful. Secret shoppers, so actually hiring someone to go through your application process and tell you where they got stuck. And then there's something called student mental models, which is kind of like personas, but is more of a, how students actually think. So not just who they are and what they experience, but also embedded in that, how they think. And so getting everyone on the same page. This is a really critical piece that I've already mentioned for the discovery process. And one of them is on what the process is, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The other is, what are we talking about when we say words? So, you know, words have meanings, they have common meanings, they also have personal meanings. And so beginning with that definition of what we're talking about when we use especially buzzwords is really helpful for making sure that conversation is valuable. So, for example, Sitting Bull College is a great tribal college, and they decided that who are we to define what student success is? So they didn't. They brought their students in and said, we need you to define to us what student success is. And this is what they came up with. Can everyone read it, or do you want me to read it out? I'm just going to give you 1 minute to read it. So the thing I like about this, it has a realness to it that I don't think administrators would ever get to. No offense, but we're further removed from the student experience than we like to think. But one thing I do like about this is if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. And so when you're going through this redesign, if it's not hard, you're not doing it right. Sorry. It's going to be hard. And that's good because then it's actually going to have an impact on your students and on your advisors and on your support staff and on faculty. And so the other part of getting people on the same page is the current process. And so what we've used, the tool we've used with our IPAS colleges quite a few times is process mapping. And so this maps out the existing process, the decisions, the activities, the certain interactions that you have to go through for a specific part of the student experience. And so the main benefit at the discovery phase is that it helps get everyone on the same page about what actually happens. It can highlight things that are confusing or contradictory. And it's a nice visual representation, if it's too complex, for why you need to make some changes. A potential pitfall that I've seen colleges fall into is that they get so focused on the process, they forget that they're actually meant to be focusing on the student, not just, oh, well, we'll just change this policy. Well, okay, but how does that impact the student? Does it make it any better for them or just for us? And so it needs to be guided by that student piece. And so an example, so Northeast Wisconsin Technical College has used both of these. And actually their intake survey was created from some of these design thinking pieces. And so they realized their intake area was kind of complex. They weren't getting the students the supports they needed at the start. And so they were losing a lot of people from application through to the first day, which is where that intake survey came from. They did use some design thinking approaches, so they've used observation quite a lot. They did it themselves, so they didn't bring any external organization in to do that, but they did bring someone in to do mystery shopping. So they had a company come in and go through certain processes and give them advice on what were the sticking points, what worked, what didn't, where are the gaps. And so from that, they created that intake survey. The next phase of their work, they're going to be using process mapping. They are bringing an external organization in to do that, but again, you don't have to. And so what they're going to be doing is looking at the student communication piece. And so what they want to do is make sure that when they're communicating with students, they're not bombarding them at one point and then 1 week not saying anything at all, or having multiple different departments all converge on the student as soon as they've completed the intake survey. And they also want to include a kind of growth mindset messaging. So when they're emailing them, how does the student receive that message? How is it written? Is it written with a kind of growth mindset? So you can do this, and here's how we're going to help, rather than you need to go and do this right now. And they're a great example, and they can talk a lot about how they've used some of these approaches to inform their work. So now we're going to go into the next activity. So we want you to take one of the pain points or one of the focus areas that you were talking about 10 or 15 minutes ago. And what we want you to do is to start a process map. So it has to be narrow. Think of a very narrow pain point that you are focusing on. And what we want you to do is use the Post-it notes and the pens. And we're going to come around with flip chart paper for you to put that on. And we want you to start this process map. So these are the steps you'll take. 1, write the pain point at the top so you all know what you're focusing on. Next, define the start of the process and then the end of the process. Write on one Post-it note the start and put it at the top, and then on the second, put it at the bottom, write the end point. And then in between, you're going to brainstorm the pieces that take place in between those two. So the decision points that the student or the organization has to make. You want to take the interactions that students have with the college and any other activities that take place between those 2 points. And each activity goes on one Post-it note. From that, you are going to then order them. So you don't have to order them at the start, just get them all on a Post-it note. Then put them in an order on your flip chart, And then you're going to put the arrows to show where things go and how it flows. And then finally, you have a process map key in the middle of your table, and you're going to use that and use that next to each step. Is it a student activity or decision? Or is it an institutional one? And that means faculty or staff have to make that decision. Is it a technology that the student has to interact with? And then the final one is anything else. So if it doesn't fit into any of those three, it goes into that last bucket. So we are handing out the flip chart paper now, and we're going to be wandering around to kind of help you through this if you have questions. But we are going to give you about 25 minutes for this, and we'll have some reflection questions for you as well. So 25 minutes, process maps on the top, and if you have any questions, we'll be walking around. At least 3 colleges from their experience what they talked about at their table. So I am going to call first on Union County because they're over here at the front. And so we're going to, if we can stop the conversation and listen to Union County's, yes, please stand up, discussion and what they were talking about. So first I want you to say what pain point or what part of the process you were talking about, and then just a brief overview of what you were saying.
Okay. So when we went through our discovery inventory, one of the things we knew we had an issue with was the communications we sent out to students and the number of communications we sent out to students. So at our table over here, we have like a central, we have a bunch of cohorted programs, and then we also have like the central advising area. And this just kind of shows the all the different emails that we send out to remind students to register and then pay their bill. So we kind of thought it was a little ridiculous, but I don't know. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Now, basically, we're seeing that, again, they're getting a lot of communication, and that may be actually counterproductive because, okay, I'm getting so many emails from so many different sources, I'm just going to choose to ignore it because, okay, here's another email from, and again, they may be part of EOF, they may be a STEM major, they may get a general advising email, one from our graduation team, and so, you know, are they losing the message? Is the message not getting through because of being inundated with a lot of emails? So, as you know, this is very, you know, an eye-opening for us because now we're seeing like I'm operating in my EOF world and I'm focusing on my students, and now I'm seeing, oh yeah, they are getting a lot of emails, and so maybe they are ignoring my emails too because they're just so sick of getting emails. So, you know, we're already having a discussion. Okay, how can we improve this so they're not, you know, being inundated with all these emails, and the message that we want them to get is actually getting through to them.
Great, thank you very much. I know there are other groups that talked about student communication. Thank you. There were other groups that talked about student communication as well. We have a couple of minutes extra. Does anyone want to comment, say if they had a similar experience? Yeah?
Oh, thank you. So we also talked about student communication, more of like a general aspect, because we don't use a very user-friendly email. So it was more about how we can do a migration to a Gmail type of account, which a lot of schools use. So it was more so framing it from that point of view, which is before, during, and after the semester. So it was more general in that sense. It kind of goes from, you know, taking it to the ITS director, doing pricing and things like that.
And then on to the executive team.
Oh, executive teams, yes.
Approval, hopefully. Migration by the ITS department. And the end result being a campus-wide Gmail account. Far more user-friendly.
Great, thank you. Anyone? Okay, I'm going to come to Passaic now. They're going to share what they talked about.
Sure. Okay. So our issue that we discussed were registration holds. And if you can see, it's very convoluted. So a student can attempt to register either online or in person, and this hold message comes up. And it's not always really clear what the issue is. They get a very general financial, student affairs, dismissal, probation. There's a whole gamut of them. And this doesn't even cover them all. So then the student has to determine where did the hold get placed, from what office. They have to physically go to that office because we won't talk to them over the phone about their holds because we don't know if it's truly them. So then they need to go through this cycle of, and remember, there could be multiple holds, so they could be bouncing back and forth between offices. So then they need to complete whatever is missing. Is it readmission? So if, in our case, if a student is out for a semester, they can't automatically re-register for classes. They have to go to admissions and readmit. That's the Board of Trustee policy. And then once that's done, they're good to go. If it's a financial issue from Bursar, then they either need to pay their balance or enroll in a payment plan. So that can take time because our students don't always have the balance needed to pay it off. If it's a Dean of Students hold, it could be immunization records and where are they going to get them? I'm 50 years old. I don't know, when I had those shots. So they have to track those down or get go to the city health center to get their little tighter things done. So that's an extra step. Financial aid holds, academic appeals, if they've been dismissed or suspended, then they have to go see a committee that only meets once or twice before classes begin. So lots of hurdles that they have to go through. When that's finally resolved, then they're able to register. And that always doesn't happen on the same day. It can take a couple of weeks. And then our little codes, a lot of them are both institutional and student hurdles that they have to deal with. And technology finally comes into place when the holds are removed and they're good to go. So not always user-friendly.
Thank you. I know how it feels about the shots. As an immigrant, I've had to tell the US government many times when I had my last shot, so it's very difficult to remember. Okay, there was one more group that I approached to ask to share, and it's here with the pretty one. They have very good artistic skills over here, and so they're going to share them with you now. Who needs to...
Cumberland County College, because stuff does exist below Princeton, just in case if you were wondering. So we had problems with our advising model. It's decentralized, and we really couldn't get it to the place where we could have it centralized, so we had to make it work. So what we did is we separated it to above 30 credits and below 30 credits. All of the students who are below 30 credits get intrusive or proactive advisement. That includes professional development, career services, collaborative partnerships, interventions, on-off campus engagement, advising support services. We use Starfish as our technology, and academic planning. All of our students who are in a cohort also get that specialized intrusive model, EOF, SSS, et cetera. Then, as we're working with our students below 30, we're teaching them or helping them map out their plan, and we're basically, hopefully, delivering a self-sufficient student to faculty. Because what faculty said to us is, we don't want to do the developmental stuff. I don't want to advise on the developmental sequel. I want to advise on my content that I'm I'm the master of, faculty. So this is our current model, and we're hoping. We also built a training module in Blackboard, so it has all of our resources listed in there, and advisors do training through there. So the other piece that faculty told us was we need training. So hopefully with Starfish, and now with us connecting with faculty, with them having those resource modules available to them, and a student that comes prepared and really just needs more of a mentor and perhaps transfer advice, we'll have more participation with advising with faculty. Thank you.
Great. So we have a couple of minutes before lunch. Thank you to everyone who shared, and for everyone generally for the energy that was in the room when you were doing that. So we have 5 minutes, and we have a couple of questions that once you've completed your process map, when you get back to campus, when you've been through the kind of training that's coming after this that will really help you understand how to do it effectively. This was just kind of a taster for what's coming and what you're going to learn much more about. So these are some reflection questions that once you have a process map, you can use on your campus to generate discussions about what's missing and what you need to change. So those will be in the PowerPoint for you to use when you get back to campus once you've done that. So we're now moving into lunch, and I'm going to pass it over to May-Yen, who's going to introduce the activity.
Great. One thing I wanted to say was if you're up for it, I think it would be great to post everyone's process maps along the back wall during lunch, because there might be some interest in seeing each other's work, and some of you are like, no. But for those who are willing, I know we've already got some started back there. These are really great. And hopefully you're feeling some energy from really starting to dig in to this work. So I'm hearing lots of buzz. I'm thinking that's because people are so excited to post their process maps. Is that right? Okay, so going to lunch. And one thing I wanted to say is during lunch, we're going to have this pink piece of paper on your table. So we have 45 minutes for lunch. At some point during that 45-minute period, I'd like to ask that you all take a look at this pink sheet of paper and spend about 10 to 15 minutes talking while you're enjoying your food with your teammates about what the leadership kind of culture is on your campus as you prepare or continue to engage in this work, because I think you've probably heard leadership come up a lot. And this is just a discussion tool to help you think through that a little bit. So pink piece of paper, discuss during lunch, 45 minutes. We'll be back here at 1:15. Thanks. Great, we're gonna come back together now. I hope you all had a great lunch and a good discussion with each other about the leadership culture for transformative change at your institution. So just a little bit, kind of think about where we've been this morning and where we're heading. So as I said at the beginning of today, we're really kind of trying to give you a lot, right? We're really trying to work you through all of the pieces of the toolkit so that you feel like you really have a solid understanding about some specific next steps that you can take. So, kind of later this afternoon, towards the end, we're going to be asking you to come up with some of those specific next steps. So hopefully in your head, you kind of, or been jotting down, what are some things that we need to do and take back to our campus. So we started this morning, kind of chapter 1 with me giving you the overview of what we're talking about. The CCRC rubric is one of the things you might want to be taking back to do at your institution as you think about, well, what does this work really look like, and where are we in our own kind of readiness for this work? We also we spent a bunch of time with Julia on the discovery and planning and just how important that piece is to really designing a successful kind of redesign of your student experience. So there, we have the discovery inventory, which I know many of you did for homework. And if you didn't, that's another thing you might put on your next steps list to get really clear about what is our current process, what are the gaps, where do we need to head, because the other 2 columns that we're going to have you do before the next institute are really clear. Well, now that we've processed some of this, okay, what is our ideal? What is our ideal? And then we also started the process mapping. I'm really impressed. Like we've, in doing these, I think you all really took on the challenge and came up with some really impressive process maps. But I hope you feel like, that's not the end of that activity. Hopefully you feel like you have, some understanding about what that looks like. There's going to be a webinar a little bit later to help you get even more specific into how to do a process map at your institution. So hopefully this is a good foundation. You might be putting that as one of your next steps. And then for lunch, during lunch, we had you do the pink sheet. And I will say, if we had a longer day, if we had you for all the time that I would like to have you, we would have spent more time on the leadership piece. But I wanted to make sure that you had some exposure to it because it could also be something that you want to take back. This is, again, thinking about the readiness. And, the leadership kind of material that we presented before, the importance of adaptive leadership, is really critical for the success of this work. So that worksheet, it draws from Achieving the Dreams Institutional Capacity Assessment Tool, has some of the questions there, as well as getting you to think about your own kind of where you are with the adaptive leadership piece. So I hope that was useful in sparking some conversation and hopefully raising some next steps that you might need to take as you think about, well, how do we make sure that we have an aligned, adaptive leadership approach to the work that we're going to undertake together. So the rest of the day, which is really only an hour and 45 minutes, right? That's short. Aren't you going to be sad? You're going to be sad to leave us? No. Okay. But we are trying to fit in a lot because we want to make sure that you have some exposure to the rest of the toolkit so you have a really solid understanding of everything that's in there, all of the tools that are at your disposal, and then sets us up to be really successful at the next institute for the kind of implementation next steps. So this afternoon, we're going to move to kind of thinking about communication as well as stakeholders, and that's a little bit of chapter 2 is the guiding team. I really encourage you, you may feel like you've got the right people at the table today. This may have also raised for you that there's some people missing now that you think about the full scope of this type of redesign that you're trying to do. Chapter 2 walks you through the value of different roles at the institution and what they may contribute depending on your redesign. So I encourage you to look at chapter 2. And focusing also on chapter 6 with communication. I'm going to turn it over to Julia to lead us through that piece.
There we go. Thank you. So communication has come up quite a few times already, and there are various different components of it. When we talk about communication, primarily, especially at the start, we really try and focus on the groups that you need to communicate with to engage them in the work. So not just the groups that you may want to provide information to and how you do that, or maybe not the student communication piece that some of you have been talking about, but really the groups that are going to actually lead and drive this change on your campus. How do you communicate with them? And so we've got a couple of slides and then a quick activity for this. And these are just some of the things that we know from working with the IPAS colleges. And the first thing is that if we're going to try and change the student experience, the first step is getting everyone to understand that it may mean that we're going to have to change ourselves. And that's the institution as a whole, as well as possibly us in our day-to-day jobs. And that is not always easy. And so we've talked about the barriers before, and these are some of the things we hear a lot on campus when we're talking to people. And honestly, we've probably all said these ourselves at one point in time or another, because there's a lot of changes going on and we have a lot more to do already. And so one framework that we've found is somewhat useful in helping think about how you communicate with people at each of these phases is Hall and Hall's concerns-based model. And so these take you through the steps that people go through as they're addressing or experiencing a change. So you may start with, I don't know what this is, so I'm not particularly concerned with it. And that's when you're at the awareness phase and you really need to start making people understand what you're trying to do. And then you go into informational. So they start to get a bit interested, and I need to know more information before I think know that this is the right way to go or not. And then you move into personal. So if they are, whether they're bought in or not, they may start thinking, okay, well, this change is coming. What does it mean for me? I need to know how this is actually impacting me on a daily basis. And then it goes into the management. So you're actually implementing a change. And then you start seeing concerns related to, well, I've got a lot of these management things going on. I'm spending a lot of time doing X, and I really need to be doing Y. And then that goes into, how does that actually affect my daily work? Am I getting done the things that I need to get done? If not, how can I do that? And so then we go into more of a relational. So once you've kind of gone through the pieces of your own thought process and your own work, you start to try and make connections and relate to others more. So you kind of have that lens as well. And then hopefully people get to this phase where they're really starting to think of, oh, this is good. It could be better, and here's how I think we could improve it. So this is one kind of theory of how people address change, and some of the concerns really do help you kind of think through what communication you need to have at each phase. The other piece of it is, again, from the leadership research, training we do, is the different change styles. And so people address and approach change in very, very different ways based on who they are as people. And so in the top, you're all facing this way, left-hand side, you've got the reflection people who need to know some information about how it's actually going to affect people. So they care about the people that they work with, the students that they work with, their colleagues, and they want to know how it's going to affect them, this change. But they also need time to think about it. So they need to reflect, they process on their own individually. They may not be the first people who ask questions. They may be sitting quietly as you're talking to them. And that's fine, that's one change style. And then you've got the action and people-oriented. So they're the includers. They're the people that really want to get people engaged, but they also need to know how. They need to know what steps are going to take place and what this actually means in practice, not just in theory. And then below those, you have the drivers. So the people who just want to get started now. They're like, right, I'm on it, let's go. What do I need to do? How do I get started? And they need the detail. They're going to be the people that come up to you and say, this is great, but I don't know what this actually means. Give me more specifics. And they're the people that really are going to help you drive that work forward quickly. And then you've got the analyzers, the people who really do need that detail, but need time to process it. And again, they may ask a lot of questions, but they also need to have the time set aside and built into your process to think about those. And so another piece of that is once you know who you're working with, who you're communicating with, who you want to bring into the conversation, there's a couple of frameworks you can use on how to communicate, and this is one of our favorites. So it's you engage with the head. So a lot of people like to see data. They need the logical reasoning for doing this stuff. And so you build that into your why. Why are we doing this? Well, the data says X, Y, and Z, or students are telling us this. And then you bring in the heart. And so this gets to especially the vision piece. Why do we have to change? But the emotional aspect of why. And so you can, again, bring the students in here, but have them bring in their stories, not just to have the data points. And then you have the hand. And that is, okay, you've told me why we need to do this logically. I get it. You've convinced me that this is the right way to go. Give me something I can do now. I want to get started straight away. And so in the communication piece, when you're thinking about it, if you have something that speaks to the head and the heart, and then give someone something they can do immediately, that will help them get involved straight away and will help drive some buy-in more quickly. And so these are just a couple of questions that we've found to be effective, especially as you're developing your vision for the change. And I'm not going to read them out, you can read them, but there is one important piece. So at the bottom, it says, what is not going to change? And so that is something that we often forget when we're talking about change. We are doing good things. And it's important that we call that out, because otherwise it just seems like we're asking everyone to constantly change all the time. And the way that can be received is, I'm not doing my job well. You're telling me I'm not doing my job well, but I care about this. And so it's really important to acknowledge we are advising students well in this area. Here's how we can make some minor refinements to improve it, or this is where we want to go with it. And so it's really, really important to keep that in your communication messaging. So you have on your table a bright yellow handout, and we have a little over 10 minutes, which isn't ideal, but is enough, I think, to start. And so what we want you to do is spend some time talking to your team about what we have on this handout. So the first thing is identifying your stakeholders, and this can be individuals or groups that you would want to include. And you've got the change sponsors who authorize change, the people who are the decision makers, the change agents who can actually make it happen on the ground. So who are those people? And then the change targets, they're the people you're going to be asking to change the way they work on a daily basis. And then you've got the change advocates, the people you know will get this and will really want to do it and will help you convince others. And so there may be groups that fit into all of these categories or multiple, and that's fine. So just write those down there. And then on the back, there are a couple of reflection questions for you to do to make sure that the team that you have is representative of those groups of people. The second activity, if you get round to it, is focused on one of those stakeholder groups. So pick one and talk about their motivations for this change that you're thinking about, and then some fears or barriers that you anticipate they may be focused on that may be a barrier to their change. So we've got about 10 minutes, and then we're going to move on to some more practical next step action planning, and this may be a component of that for you as well. So 10 minutes, and we're going to come back together. That was louder than I thought. So we have, I have an apology to make. There was one person who was going to share with you before I did, and I completely forgot. So I'm going to come and ask Jenny if you can just talk a bit about your own experience with the communication piece, but also possibly adding on a bit of what you were talking about with your colleagues.
Oh, well, I was hoping she would forget for longer than this. Good afternoon. My name is Jenny Enriquez. I am an academic counselor at Hudson County Community College. I was part of the, 14 members that got the opportunity to go to what would be the 4-day version of this institute in New Orleans at the beginning of the month. And when Christine emailed me and said, would you like to share some reflection on something that you learned during this time, I kept thinking, well, the one thing that kept coming up in all the different things was communication. And if I tell you communication is important, most of you will be like, well, yes, we know that, Jenny. We tell all of our students, we tell our children, our spouses, but turns out we don't communicate very well. So we started looking at the fact that we needed to determine who needed to be involved in this change that we're trying to make. I'm going to cheat a little bit, if you don't mind, and look at my notes. Who needed to be involved? Identify those stakeholders, which is what we're doing right now. Who are the persons that need to be involved for this change to be effective and for it to happen? What do they need to know? Meaningful communication. As Union, I believe earlier was bringing up, sometimes we're overwhelming people with the amount of information we're sending out. Is it meaningful? What do they need to know? It's important for them to know these things. Then why? Well, because it's important. If you want people to buy into the change, if they feel like they're part of creating this change, then it's going to work better. I keep bringing up the analogy that when children tell you they don't eat, oh, my kid doesn't eat vegetables. Well, you know what? Maybe if they grow it, maybe if they cook it, all of a sudden they're eating vegetables because they're part of that process. Now, what were we talking about? We were talking about a lot of things here. So we were trying to identify what the different stakeholders were for a couple of these different groups. And when it came to who authorizes change, it seemed that most of us were pretty on board of understanding that administrators, vice presidents, deans, and board of trustee are the ones that authorize this change at the bigger level. And then it trickles down to who has to implement this change, who is it going to benefit. What else? Who are the advocates? And the advocates, we came up a lot with the student leaders. They're usually the advocates, and they bring in the buy-in, the other students, because they are the peers of these students. Did I miss anything? No? Okay, thank you.
I did forget. So hopefully that gives you a kind of different college perspective rather than just us saying this is what we know other colleges have done, from hearing actually directly from someone in the room. So we are moving into another activity and we are giving you another handout. But what I hope that you see is that this one especially leads into the next handout. So we're moving into an activity that's really focused on planning for action. This is somewhat aligned to the action planning chapter in the toolkit, but what we've done, we're hoping that this activity gets you thinking more as a team here about what your next steps are, as well as personally what your own individual next steps are. The planning for action chapter in the toolkit is much more about the institutional plan moving forward. And so what we're trying to do now is help you think about the next steps. So we have the worksheet on the table that is being handed out now. It's in it's the light yellow one. And you'll notice that there are different levels. So the first question looks at the institution level. The next couple of questions look at your team that is at the table with you now. And then on the back, you have more of the individual personal next steps and reflections that we want you to take. So we're going to give you about 20 minutes to, as a team, and then individually work through this worksheet. And then we're going to come back together, and what we want is to have kind of people report out on some of their own next steps, but in particular, one next step for the team, and then one personal thing that you're going to do to drive this work forward when you get back to campus. So as you're going through this and doing this, please prepare yourself to share out with your colleagues, because I know we all want to hear from each other. So 20 minutes, and we'll come back together to share out. So the first college I'm going to call on is Camden County. Can you raise your hand? Who is going to speak from Camden?
Oh, thank you. Hello, I'm Linda Drexel from Camden County College. Hi. Basically, we started with that we really need to look at where we are right now. So, we have an academic advisement center with only 3 full-time advisors. We have 10,000 students. So we supplement with part-time people, but we say all the time that we don't have, that's all we have is 3 full-time. But when you look at it, we have more than that. We have EOF advisors, we have like 4 of those. We have a veterans counselor, an international counselor, some of the other ones we said, disability services. So when you step back and say, how many people do we really have that help advise? We might have more like 12 or something like that. So I think we need to be realistic about what we have. And then we need to be realistic about our student population. So we talked about gathering data about our students. You know, we have 10,000 students. How many of those can you pull out because they're advised by AOF, they're advised by the Veterans Counselor, they're advised by International? Break them down by programs. How many programs specifically advise their students? How many, then how many are left in liberal arts and science is science, and how many are in liberal arts and sciences, the AA? To really look at what we have and be able to go to our president and board of trustees and say, this is a realistic picture of what we have. We have this many people advising, we have these many students, these are our needs. Because we say all the time, we complain and say, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough people. Well, nobody wants to hear that anymore. They want to know, they want to say, well, what do you need? Well, why do you need them? So if we can look at realistically what we have and what our student needs are, then we could come up with a plan of maybe it is going to be that up to 30 credits, the centralized advising advises, and then they go out to the program people. But so that's what we set as like our goal 1, was to just really identify where we are instead of just talking anecdotally all the time about where we are. And then we already have a guided pathways group in place. So we've met 2 times. It's kind of been limping along in a way. We're in the middle of a middle states review, a website change, a new VP, just like everybody else. But so things are limping along. But we have this group of active people who are interested, and we have a pretty good number of faculty that are included in that. So we want to go back to that group and give them some actionable items that are related to this redesign of student services and advising. So those were 2 goals that we came up with. And then we had just just minor next steps. We're just really about getting those things done.
That's great. So thank you very much. The next person we're going to call on is Keith from Essex.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to, people know me because I'm very honest, and I'm going to be very honest. We came together, we didn't do this worksheet, but we came together and we met and talked here about what we want to do at Essex in terms of moving forward with a plan to integrate student support and redesign. And through the process of looking at just talking about the stakeholders and champions, we really made a conscious decision that we're moving forward with our goals for this. We're going to summarize everything that we've done, present it to Dean's Council. Then the next step we're going to do as part of that is we're going to recommend to our president, our Dean's Council, and our cabinet the formation of an academic advisement committee for the entire institution so that we can be the champions of the change that we want to see using this information.
That's great. Thank you. Great. So, home team, I did promise I would call on you. It's Middlesex.
Hello, Terry Oroz, Middlesex County College. So one of the goals that we talked about was, and I think it's probably shared by all institutions, is better communication. We have a lot of new initiatives rolling out this year. We have a new learning management system. We are rolling out student planning. So we've got a lot of technology that's coming all at once. And so we really want to see what areas can really develop a very targeted communication plan to help everybody who's feeling a little anxious about all of these changes. So to that end, I lead the Guided Pathways team here at Middlesex. And in our first meeting this year, we talked about looking at a flow chart, like looking at where students are along their pathway from entering the college to completion, and finding where, guided pathways initiatives can fit into that. But as we sat here and talked amongst ourselves, we've done that. We've been doing that. I'm sure lots of you have done that over the years for various initiatives. And so at this point, rather than reinventing the wheel, just looking at and identifying one process in one functional area and reviewing it and revising it as needed, so that with the goal of improving student experiences and aligning them and identifying key guided pathway initiatives, that align with what we're doing here at the college and align with the guiding principles of guided pathways. So we're hoping deadline would be our February meeting of the guided pathways team, and we would, try and shepherd this through the guided pathways team. It's a lot of folks, a cross-section of the campus, so a lot of representation from all aspects of the campus, and of course, bringing in folks as needed to help us in that effort.
That's great. Thank you very much. Everyone take note, they have a deadline already. That is good. So my final one is Erin from Sussex. So we're over here.
So our first goal was defining advising and counseling. What is it? What is advisement? What is counseling? Who is an advisor? Who does advising and things like that? Because too often advising and counseling gets confused with registration and class planning. So really defining those roles. The second goal is to collect collaborative ideas on the redesign of it. So our goals are training faculty members who have attended the Guided Pathways trainings and has presented to faculty to provide a wider training, Our second step would be a formulation of an interdisciplinary advisory committee, including students, alumni, staff, faculty, and administration.
That's great. Thank you very much. Great. So hopefully, if that has given you some inspiration, hearing from some of your colleagues as well about what their plans are, what their goals are. And so we're going to move quickly into the last component of the day, and hopefully this will also be one of your next steps.
Great. Those are awesome next steps for everyone. And the good news is that we get to hold each other accountable, right? Because we'll be back together in March and can hear you report out on the next steps that you took. Sounds like there's some new groups forming, some new data that's going to be looked into. So it sounds like there'll be a lot of good things to share when we come back together. So we are quickly approaching 3 o'clock, and we will absolutely be ending right at 3 o'clock. So don't you worry at all. Unfortunately, I guess I drew the short straw of talking about progress tracking at 2:30 on a Friday. But it turns out I really love progress tracking. I think it's really important. Hopefully some of my enthusiasm will wear off on you because, we liked it, and I only have 4 slides. So, don't worry, I'm not going to be, lecturing about data. But we found that this is such a critical piece to think about the evaluation aspect from the point of design. Not after you've launched something to see how well you did, but really to do it from the point of design. And so that's why I want to give you a little bit of this right now in the hopes that one of your personal next steps will be to join the webinar that's in February on action planning and progress tracking to go a little deeper, and that you'll kind of continue to make that work. And that you don't just send IR people to attend that webinar. It's really not for IR, but I'll get there. Okay, so first, why progress tracking? Here's a few things that get overlooked when we don't think about the progress tracking piece as a part of our design. The first thing is that sometimes we can lose the original intent of the work over time, right? So we think we're starting out and we're going to do this. Some time passes, we make some tweaks, some adjustments, and then by the end we realize, what was the original intent of what we were trying to get at with this change? Well, if we can have a really strong progress tracking plan in place, we can really be measuring where we're heading against what our intended outcomes were. We have to identify those intended outcomes from the beginning. The other thing is, sometimes when we talk about evaluation, we look at these big measures like student retention, and then, you know, if we're waiting for student retention as a part of the redesign that we're doing, it can take a while to impact those larger summative kind of measures. And also it can lose some of the attention to what we're really trying to change, which, as you'll remember for this work, is transformative change. It's changes to structure, process, and attitude. So, you know, how are people's developing the knowledge and the skills and really making those changes that are necessary to really have that transformative impact? You know, progress tracking also helps us really, you know, be clear on the goals that we have, make sure that we're heading towards them. And then, you know, it also can be a really important part of the momentum. So I know we've talked a little bit about communication and resistance, and, you know, being able to set some short-term markers to track our progress along the way is a really good way to make sure that we're keeping people informed and that they know that we're actually following through on some of these changes that we're seeking, and they see the momentum. We can celebrate some of those short-term wins because we've actually established for ourselves, you know, what are some of the key milestones in the work that we're doing. Because a lot of the work that we're doing, guided pathways, this type of redesign, it's really large-scale work. This is in your chapter 8, and you know, we'll go into more detail on the webinar, but I do like to highlight the idea of formative measures versus summative measures, and that we really want to be focusing on what are those changes in attitudes, knowledge, and skills, those changes in behaviors that we're going to need in order to reach this vision that we've come up with. So if we can work backwards from the vision that we have for the student experience, the way that, you know, I loved the group that Sussex, that was talking about redefining roles. There's probably some specific kind of knowledge, skills, attitudes, behaviors that people in those roles are going to need to do, and we want to make sure that we're giving them what they need to really move into those roles in a meaningful way. So really thinking about what are those changes and coming up with some measures can be really helpful. In chapter 8, there are a ton of different measures. It gives you a lot of examples, and when you think about the different types of changes and attitude that you're looking for. It's just a starting place, but we find that it's helpful for people to start thinking about what some of those measures are, because it can be kind of hard, you know, when we think about, well, changes in attitudes, how do we really measure that? So in chapter 8, we tried to give you some examples of some specific measures that you could be using. You know, when we think about this work, I also like to highlight again, like who needs to be involved and what are the steps. So, you know, if we're going to develop a progress tracking plan, the first thing is that we don't just farm it out to IR, right? Because actually it's the design team, and maybe IR is on the design team, but it's the design team that really knows what you're trying to accomplish and what those intended outcomes are. IR is not the one that needs to come up with what the intended outcomes for your redesign is, but it should be something that's done collaboratively between that design team and then hopefully IR is in the room, because the next step is really how do you translate that to some measurable outcomes, and that's where we do want IR to be a partner in the process. And then, you know, they can be really helpful in thinking about the data collection plan, and this is where we'll spend a little more time on the webinar, because there's some really creative ways to think about how to track progress more than just waiting for your completion numbers or, you know, some other kind of larger measure. It can be things like doing flash focus groups in the cafeteria, using tick sheets at the front desk or for advising. You know, what are some of the questions that students are asking? Do you see a change in those over the course of the semester and in terms of how you're trying to make these changes? So there's some strategies and different ways you can do some of this data collection to give you some real-time information to help you make adjustments to the rollout of your changes along the way. Instead of waiting until the end of the semester or the end of the year to say what worked, what didn't work, can we make some real-time adjustments along the way? And then finally, the fourth step is just to make sure that we're actually using that data. Sometimes we can collect it, but do we close the loop and actually use that data, sending that back to that guiding implementation or design team to make those adjustments along the way? How'd I do? That was progress tracking. No, but I feel a little guilty that you really only got like 4 slides on it, but I hope that it piqued your interest enough that you can see the connection between, you know, why we want to do progress tracking as a part of the design, and that you will come to that webinar, and bring the folks that you need to do that. How many people are feeling really, okay, I'll remove the word really. How many people are excited about progress tracking as a part of this work? How many people recognize it needs to be a part of this work? Oh yes, everybody, okay, good. Okay, great. So I just kind of flew through that, again, just wanting to pique your interest, getting everyone on the same page around the role of progress tracking, and also because now, that was chapter 8. Chapter 9 is about refinement and sustainability. That's another piece, we'll be focusing more on that in the second institute, as well as a follow-up webinar that we'll do in April. But I, hope that you feel like you've gotten a little sense of each of the chapters. So right now we're gonna pass out the evaluation. So we're a little bit early, but I have some closing remarks that I did want to give. We're gonna pass out an evaluation because I wanted to make sure that you had some time to do that. We really value your feedback on this type of institute and workshop. And we particularly value it because we're going to be coming back to you in March, and we want to make sure that we really hit your needs. So on here, we're asking you for things like, what lingering questions do you have? What would you like to see more of? What was valuable? So we hope that you'll spend a few minutes really taking the time to complete that. I also wanted to share a little bit more about resources, because I know I've already had some people coming up to me asking, oh, do you have resources on this, or can you connect me with that? So the short answer is yes, and one thing I wanted to say is that we're going to be sticking around. I know we're going to end soon, but we'll be here for any kind of Q&A that you want to have, or if there's specific resources you're looking for. I wanted to point out a few that are on the slide. One is, you've heard us mention IPASS quite a few times today. So this is the grant initiative that the institutions have been working on. There's some resources on that website. There's also a blog series if you're interested in kind of how other institutions have been talking about this work through Educause, who's one of our partners in that work. The other thing is, CCRC, we cite a lot. They have a lot of research. And the great thing about CCRC, and you may already use some of their research, is that they've got these really dense working papers. But then for every dense working paper, they produce these really nice short practitioner guides. So I encourage you to use and access those resources as well. The other thing that we'll be passing out, oh, do you want me to go back? That we'll be passing out is a card, because one of the resources is your toolkit, but you'll see in the toolkit, every chapter just about has a template. Different types of action planning templates or things like that. So on the card that you receive, there's a short URL that will take you to a folder where you can download an electronic version of this toolkit. Feel free to share it with others who were not able to come. You can also download all of the worksheets and templates that are in this toolkit in Word form. So if there's one, if you really want to be using that version of the action plan, there's a communication template. I know a lot of people talked about communication as one of their next steps. I encourage you to go in and download all of that material for you to continue to use. On the other side of that card is some information about some other kind of opportunities and workshops. So for those of you who've been to one of our conferences before, we have our big annual conference this year. Will be in February in Nashville. And we have a series of opportunities and workshops being presented there on this topic. We have a full day pre-institute as well as a track of sessions at DREAM. And I realized I did the classic mistake of giving out the evaluation before I was done talking. I did, didn't I? You can write that on the feedback to facilitators. Say, please learn to not give out the evaluation before you're done talking. Okay, so even though I'm going to try to overcome that error, homework. So, one thing that we hope is that for those of you that completed the discovery inventory, that you felt like that was provided you a solid foundation for the conversations that you had here. We're going to request again that you go back to that inventory and complete the last 2 columns. So that's really looking at the ideal design and kind of the changes that are going to be needed. Because hopefully by now, you've spent a little time in the current. We've exposed you a little bit to the possibilities, and now you can really be thinking about your ideal. So I encourage you to find the time between now and March 2nd to sit down, come together as a group to complete those last 2 columns. The other piece of homework is that rubric that we started with, right? So the CCRC rubric that we asked that you go back to your institution and come up, have a meeting with your group, come to consensus on where you would score your institution. We're going to send out a link for you to submit your scores. Just it's a place where you can kind of aggregate them, and it'll help us collect them. So that will be coming to you in a couple of weeks as you complete that work. And all of this will be coming to you in email since no one's listening to me anyway. So no, I'm just kidding. But no, it is all going to be coming to you in an email. I'm going to turn it over to Christine to give a few more kind of wrap-up comments. And then we are going to let you go a little bit early. But again, we are here. We hope that you'll come to us, any kind of consultation or questions that you have. And I want to thank you all for your engagement and for really being really thorough with your feedback, because I can see you're all writing.
Thanks, Megan. If I could just ask you to just join me one more time in really thanking the ATD team here, Megan, Julia, everybody here. Thank you so much. All of our national partners as well. It's great to have everyone in the same room. So I appreciate you folks for taking that evaluation very seriously. So I'm very glad about that. You're going to get some strong feedback from New Jersey. So yes, please provide specific feedback. A couple of key issues. As you know, this is only the kickoff event. There's a year-long program. You can see it outlined there. Hopefully you received, if you didn't, you can pick one up on your way out, a flyer with all that information on it. We can also email that out to you if you need that. The card that Mayan mentioned looks like this. So if you didn't pick one of those up, you can also pick one of those up on your way out. If anyone needs CEUs or PDs, well, you folks are probably mostly CEUs. If you want those, you can grab those on your way out. And we do also ask that you recycle your name badges. So we are going to, stop at this point, but Mayan and her team are willing to stick around for a while. They wanted to go to 4:30 to start off with, just so you know. I saved the day for you folks. And I'm like, my peeps, they're not going past 3. And then they gave you even a bigger gift. So, but they're around, and I would encourage you, if you have a few minutes of time and you want to utilize them while they're here, please feel free to do so. Or if you want to stay and work with your team a little bit longer, the space isn't closing up in any, but I know many of you have to travel far. So we want to be respectful of that. It's a Friday. So thank you all for coming. We really were delighted to have you.